A wealthy rancher took one look at the little girl's wheelchair and called off the wedding right there in front of the whole town. Amelia Carter had come 1,000 miles with 2 worn bags, $4, and a daughter who needed her, and in the space of a minute a man she had never met decided the 2 of them were not worth his trouble. The crowd at the freight landing watched. A few of them laughed. Nobody stepped forward. But one man had been standing at the edge of that crowd the whole time, and he was not looking at the wheelchair. He was looking at the woman who did not flinch. If you have ever been judged and found wanting by people who never once looked you in the eye, stay with me. This one is for you. Let me take you back to a mountain supply town called Silver Creek, and a south window with no seat under it yet, and the afternoon the wrong man walked away and the right one stepped forward. The freight came into Silver Creek a little past 2, dragging a tail of dust up a road that climbed out of the low country toward the high passes. The town sat in a hollow at the foot of the mountains, a tight cluster of unpainted buildings pressed against country too big to argue with. And the wind came down off the peaks, carrying the smell of pine and of a thing that had been dry too long. Amelia had been awake since before dawn. She had held Lily in her lap for the first hours, then settled her back into the chair when the girl complained her legs had gone to sleep, which was not a thing Lily's legs did anymore. But she said it out of habit, and Amelia never corrected her. Some habits were worth keeping. Lily was 6 years old and had not walked since she was 4. In the 2 years since, she had developed a precise and unsettling ability to read the face of every grown person who looked at her. She knew, before they did, exactly what they were about to feel. The quick flick of the eyes down to the chair and back up. The softening that was really a kind of retreat. The 2 bright voice people used when they had decided to be kind at her instead of to her. She could tell the ones who pitied her from the ones who were scared of her, from the rare ones who simply saw a girl in a chair and went on treating her like a girl. There were not many of the third kind. "Is that it?" Lily asked, her nose to the window. "That's it. It's brown. Most places are brown out here." Lily considered that with the gravity of someone who had been told it several times and still found it unconvincing. Our street back home wasn't brown. "No," Amelia said. It wasn't. She did not say anything else. Home was not home anymore, and there was no use pretending the word still meant what it once had. Home had been a narrow set of rooms in Cincinnati, with gas lamps and a landlord who coughed through the walls at night, and a job sewing trim onto ladies' coats at a factory that paid Amelia 40 cents a day, and considered itself generous for the doing of it. It had been manageable until it wasn't. The factory cut its hours. The landlord raised the rent. Lily's accident had already taken the small savings her husband's death had left, and then taken more, because a doctor who will see a poor woman's child twice is a doctor who expects to be paid. And the chair itself had cost a good wool blanket and a month of egg money traded to a family whose own boy had mended and no longer needed it. There had come a night, she remembered it precisely, the way you remember the moment a thing turns, when she had sat at the kitchen table with Lily already asleep and added the numbers 3 separate times and gotten 3 different answers. All of them wrong. All of them ending the same place. There was not enough, and there was not going to be enough, and a woman alone with a child who could not walk did not get the luxury of waiting to see whether her luck would change. She had not written back to the advertisement because she was romantic. She had written back because she was out of other doors. The advertisement had run in a Western Gazette, the kind of paper that drifted through the poor streets of Cincinnati on its way from somewhere else. Rancher seeks capable woman, honest and hard-working, for companionship and partnership in frontier life. It had said capable, not beautiful. Honest, not young. Those 2 words had felt deliberate, chosen by a man who knew what a working life actually required. And they were the only reason she had let herself hope at all. Nathan Whitmore's letters had come in return, formal, not warm, but steady, describing a cattle operation outside Silver Creek and a need for a wife who could keep a household and present herself with some standing in a town where his standing mattered. She had told him about Lily, or she had thought she had. Later, turning it over, she would wonder whether she had been so careful not to make too much of the wheelchair that she had all but buried it. "My daughter, Lily, who has some trouble with her legs," she had written, and moved on quickly to other things. She had not lied. She had only left room to be misunderstood. Nathan Whitmore had misunderstood. They came off the freight last, because the narrow door and the steps took a plain deal, Amelia lifting the front of the chair and keeping it level, Lily holding the armrests unasked, both of them moving with the practiced economy of people who had done this in a great many doorways. The landing was crowded for a Thursday. Silver Creek supplied 3 ranching valleys, and the weekly freight brought goods and mail and, now and then, strangers, all of which the town considered worth watching. There were perhaps 40 people about, women in plain dresses, men in canvas coats, a few children who stopped what they were doing to stare at the chair. Amelia was used to the staring. She did not enjoy it, but she had stopped flinching somewhere around the 6-month mark. She found him near the far end of the landing, standing with 2 other men, tall brown hair going gray at the temples, a dark green vest, the one detail he had ever offered. She watched his face as she approached, and she saw the exact moment he saw the wheelchair. His look started as knowing, moved through a thing like confusion, and settled into a look she had seen on other faces and knew how to read. It was the look of a man who believed he had been deceived. "Miss Whitmore," she said. "Miss Carter." His voice was flat. His eyes dropped to the chair and came back up, and he did not offer his hand. "I wasn't expecting," he stopped. "I mentioned Lily in my letters. You mentioned a daughter with some trouble walking." His voice had the careful, pressed quality of a man choosing words to avoid the ones he was actually thinking. "I knew that to mean a bad leg, an injury that had healed poorly. Not," he made a short gesture that took in the chair, the girl, the whole situation. "The injury didn't heal," Amelia said. "I thought I was clear." "You weren't." Behind her, the conversations on the landing were thinning as people drifted closer to listen. A woman said a thing low to her friend and got a quiet laugh in return. "You never told me you were bringing a child like this," Nathan said. He said it plainly, the way a man points out a mistake in the price of lumber. And that plainness, that complete absence of any sign that Lily was sitting 3 feet away, 6 years old, hearing every word, was what stopped Amelia cold. She felt a thing drop in her chest. Not break. Drop, the way a stone drops in still water, gone from the surface so cleanly you are not sure it was ever there, and disturbing all of it underneath. Lily's small fingers closed around the armrest, and she stopped looking at Nathan Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore," Amelia said quietly. "My daughter has a name." He did not admit it. "I need a wife who can manage a ranch. Someone who can ride, who can help with the work, who can present herself at community gatherings without—" He stopped, and this time the pause lasted long enough that she knew he was not going to find an end to the sentence that either of them could live with. "Without what?" she said. "This deal isn't going to work. I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll pay your return fare to Cincinnati." The silence on the landing was the plain kind that happens when a crowd wants to pretend it isn't listening while making certain it misses nothing. A child asked its mother what was happening and was shushed without an answer. The wind came up off the hills. Amelia looked at Nathan Whitmore a long moment. He was not, she thought, a cruel man in any deliberate way. He was a man who had decided what he needed and found she did not match the decision, and was now ending the matter with as little fuss as he could manage, so focused on the tidiness of it that he had truly not noticed, or had chosen not to notice, that the center of the problem he was solving so efficiently was a 6-year-old child who could hear him. That was somehow worse than cruelty. "I won't be taking the return fare," she said, "and I don't want your apology." Nathan frowned. "My daughter is not a complication in a business deal." Her voice stayed even. She had learned, in the years since Lily's accident, to keep it even when all of it underneath was not. "She is a child. She has a name. Her name is Lily, and she is sitting right here. And you have spoken about her twice now without once looking at her. I think you should know that's the kind of thing a person doesn't forget." "I'm not trying to be unkind," Nathan said, though his voice suggested he was mostly trying not to be embarrassed. "I know," Amelia said. "That's what makes it worse." She turned the chair, angling it away from him, and took one step. Then she stopped, because she did not actually know where she was going. That was the practical truth under the dignity. She had 2 worn bags on the landing, $4.60 in her coat, no acquaintance in Silver Creek, no contact in the whole territory, and a daughter who needed to eat within the hour or become the kind of quietly furious that took 2 days to mend. Every word of her last line had been true. It lived in the same body as a woman doing arithmetic in the back of her mind about whether $4 was a room and for how many nights and what came after. Lily looked up at her. Not asking. Just looking. "We're fine," Amelia said quietly. "I know," Lily said. It was the kind of thing they said to each other. Neither of them believed it entirely, and both of them needed to say it anyway. She walked to a bench against the station wall, set Lily's chair beside it, sat down, and opened a bag for a small wrapped packet of crackers she had been saving since Kansas City. Lily took 2, ate one, and held the other, looking out at the street where a wagon moved slowly through the dust with a load of fence posts. "Is that man going to make us leave? He doesn't have the authority to make us do anything. This is a public landing. But where are we going to sleep?" "I'm working on that." Lily ate the second cracker. Okay, that was one of the things Amelia loved most about her daughter, a certain pragmatic trust. Not naive. Lily knew perfectly well that the situation was hard. She had simply learned, in 2 years of living in a world not built for a wheelchair, that worrying a problem before you had any new information was wasted effort. She would ask the question, take in the answer, and wait. Amelia was still turning over her thin handful of options when she became aware that someone had stopped near the end of the bench. Not in front of her. Off to the side at a slight distance, the way a person stands when he is not sure he has any business being there. She looked up. The man was tall, taller than Nathan Whitmore, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of build that comes from work rather than from simply being large. Late 30s, maybe 40. Dark hair well past his collar and needing a cut, a thick dark beard he had let go a few days without it being a statement, and no hat at all on his head, which was strange in that country where every man wore one. His coat was good leather gone old and well kept. He was looking at her with a look she could not at once place. Not pity. Not the calculating look of a man deciding whether she was worth his time. Something more direct than either. "You need a place to stay," he said. It was not a question. "I need several things," Amelia said carefully. "Who are you?" "Wyatt Mercer." He said it the way a man says his name in a town where the name means a thing, not boasting. Just with the economy of someone used to not having to explain further. She did not know it. "I'm not from here." "I know. I've got a place about 4 miles north, the Double M." He paused. "I've also got a house that needs managing. My housekeeper left in the spring and I never replaced her. I've been feeding my hands out of a cookpot in a foul temper and the house has gone to ruin. You watched what just happened here." "Yes, and now you're offering me work." Yes, why? He took a moment before answering, which she appreciated. A man who answered that question too fast was either lying or had rehearsed, and neither was reassuring. Because I need somebody who can run a household, and you're plainly capable. And because of what I watched on this landing. He stopped, looked at Lily, who was watching him with her full unnerving attention, and looked back at Amelia. You didn't break. I've got a lot of use for people who don't break. Amelia sat with that. What are the terms? Room and board for you and your daughter. $15 a month. You manage the house, the kitchen, the supplies. You help sort the hands' schedules when they cross over with the household. You don't do ranch work, that's not what I'm hiring for. And my daughter comes with the job. She comes with the job. He said it without qualification. And then, because Amelia was watching his face, he looked at Lily again. There's a room off the kitchen, wider door than most, and a south window. It'd suit. Something in Amelia's chest shifted. Not relief, she was not there yet, but the small, careful opening that comes before it, when you realize a situation holds more possibility than you thought. I'd want to see the house, and I'd want to speak to some of your hands, references of character. One corner of his mouth moved. Reasonable, and I want it clear before we go further that this is employment, not charity. I wasn't offering charity, Wyatt said. I'm offering a job. There's a gap. Some people don't grasp that gap. I do. Lily had been listening to all of it with the concentrated stillness of a child who knows she is at the center of a talk that is not technically about her. Now she spoke. Do you have animals? Wyatt looked down at her. Some. What kind? Cattle, horses, 2 dogs that are mostly useless and think very highly of them. A barn cat that won't answer to a name but turns up when there's food, which is about all you can ask of anybody. Lily considered the moral weight of this. What are the dogs called? Buck and Henry. Those are people names. They behave like people, Wyatt said. Bad ones. Mostly it was not quite a smile, but it was adjacent to one, which was how Amelia knew her daughter was cautiously interested. He loaded the 2 bags into a working wagon, a flatbed and a bench seat, and a well-fed, mildly bored horse. Getting Lily and the chair up took a plank someone had left leaning against the station wall, laid as a ramp, and Wyatt held it steady, unasked, and without any comment about the process, which Amelia noted. Some men made a production of helping. This one just set the plank and waited. They drove north out of town on a road that was more suggestion than construction, through scrub and early autumn grass going yellow at the tips, the mountains standing to the west, enormous and indifferent. Lily watched all of it with her head turned, cataloging the new country the way she did. Amelia watched Wyatt Mercer's profile and tried to work out what she was dealing with. He was not what she had pictured. He drove with a focused quiet that was not unfriendly, answered questions directly, pointed out a landmark or 2 unasked, and did not fill the silence with noise for its own sake. He was, she suspected, the kind of man who did not show you much at first, and you had to decide whether you were willing to wait for the rest. She was not sure yet, but the road went north, and $4.60 was not going to carry them far. The Double M announced itself first as a smell, wood smoke and cattle, and the last of a garden, then as a line of fence posts, then as a cluster of buildings settled into a hollow with the permanence of things built to stay. The main house was 2 stories, stone foundation and timber walls, a covered porch the length of the front. It was not elegant. Several porch boards wanted replacing, an upstairs window had a crack patched with oilcloth, and the kitchen garden had gone mostly to seed. But the structure was sound. She could see that from the road, the bones of a thing that had once been truly cared for, showing under the neglect. You weren't wrong about the state of it, she said. I didn't claim otherwise. She looked at Lily, who was studying the house with the careful cataloguing she brought to most things. Not excitement, not disappointment, just assessment. "What do you think?" Amelia asked. Lily was quiet a moment. "The porch is big enough for the chair, and the door looks wide. We'll check it." Lily nodded slowly. "I think we could stay here a while." It was not a declaration of happiness or a vote of approval. It was a 6-year-old making a careful provisional judgment of a situation that had not given either of them much room to be plain, and deciding the room they had was enough. The inside of the house was worse than the outside, which was saying a thing. The front room had accumulated 2 months of disorder under a layer of dust. The narrow hallway smelled of old wood smoke and mildew and a thing else she chose not to identify. The kitchen was serviceable, but grim. The kind of grim that came from a man feeding himself and 5 hands out of it without once caring what it looked like. But the room off the kitchen, the one Wyatt had mentioned, had a doorframe near 3 feet across, a plank floor that was filthy but solid, and 2 south-facing windows that let the low afternoon light all the way in. Lily rolled her chair into the doorway and looked at the windows a long moment. "I want a window seat," she said. "If there is one." "There isn't," Amelia said. Then, because her daughter's face had done a small thing, but one could be built. She looked at Wyatt. "If that's permitted." "It's her room," he said, as if that settled it. Amelia walked the whole house before she agreed to anything, because she had learned that a house told you the truth about the man who kept it, if you knew how to read it. This one told her a story she saw. A place that had been loved once, by somebody, and then left to go on without that love. There were curtains in the front room, faded but well made, that no bachelor had ever chosen. There was a garden gone to seed that had once been laid out in careful rows. There was a good stove under 2 months of grease. Somebody had built this to last and to be lived in, and then that somebody had gone, and the man who remained had simply stopped seeing it. "Your wife," she said, when they were back in the kitchen. It was not quite a question. Wyatt was quiet a moment. 6 years back. Fever, he did not elaborate, and she did not push, but a thing in the set of his shoulders told her the neglect she was standing in was not laziness. It was a man who had stopped caring about a house because caring about it had once meant something he could no longer afford to feel. She knew that better than she would have said out loud. She stood in the grim kitchen and looked at the mess and the grime and the sorry state of a house left too long without anybody who cared about it, and she felt the first thing she had felt all day that was not some version of fear or grief or held in anger. She felt, cautiously and without committing to it, the beginning of purpose. "I'll need a list of what supplies are on hand," she said, "and I'll need your hand's schedule, when they eat, what they expect, whether any of them have plain requirements. And I'll need to know who in town is reliable for goods and who isn't. Connie's mercantile for the household. Stay clear of the feed merchant on the south end. He waters his prices and his product." Wyatt was standing near the door with his hat in his hands, and there was something in his expression she could not read. Not calculation, not warmth. Something in between, like a man trying to decide whether what he was seeing was what he thought he was seeing. "Mrs. Carter, that's right. My husband died 4 years ago. Mrs. Carter, you should know, people in this town are going to talk. Some of them saw what happened at the landing. Some already have opinions about what it means that you're out here. I expect they do. I'm telling you so it doesn't catch you by surprise. It won't," she said. "People have had opinions about me and my daughter for 2 years. We're still here." He looked at her a moment, then put his hat back on, turned it once to settle it, and moved toward the door. "Supper's at 6. I'll send someone to show you the water pump." He left, his boots on the porch boards, the creak of the steps, the sound of the horse as he led it toward the barn, then quiet. Lily had maneuvered her chair to the south window and was looking out at the yard, where a rusted pump handle stood, and beyond it a row of cottonwoods had gone autumn gold against the brown hills. "Mum, those trees are pretty." Amelia looked at the cottonwoods. In the low afternoon light, they were truly beautiful, gold against brown against the hard blue of the Colorado sky, the kind of color that made the whole hard landscape look briefly like something other than what it was. "They are," she said. "Are we going to be okay here?" She did not answer at once. She stood in the grimy kitchen of a stranger's house, in a town that had already watched her be shamed and then hired by a different stranger, $4.60 in her coat pocket, a daughter who needed a window seat she did not yet have, and 2 bags of all of it they owned. "Yes," she said. "We're going to be okay here." She meant it the way she always meant it, not as a statement of certainty, but as a decision. A choice made in the absence of any guarantee, which was the only way anyone had ever made it in a place like this. She started with the kitchen the next morning, because the kitchen was where all of it else began, and because a clean room to think in was worth more than an hour's sleep. She was up before 5, before the hands stirred, before Buck and Henry began their purposeless patrol of the yard. By the time the first light came through the east window, she had cleared the shelves, taken stock of the pantry, scrubbed the table and the stovetop, and coaxed up a fire that did not smoke back into the room, which she counted a personal victory. She made biscuits, flour, lard, salt, buttermilk from a crock in the cellar, and by the time the hands came in from the early chores, the kitchen smelled the way a kitchen was supposed to, which had apparently been long enough coming that 3 of the 5 men stopped in the doorway and simply stood a moment, taking it in. The tallest pulled off his hat, lean and weathered, in his 50s, a face that had been outdoors its whole life. "Calhoun, I run the hands. Amelia Carter. Sit down. There's coffee." They sat, they ate. They were quiet in the careful way of men who know the first morning is not the time to establish anything. The youngest, a boy of about 17 named Pete, watched her with an expression that moved between wary and defensive. He had been managing the kitchen, however poorly, for 2 months, and her arrival was a displacement he had not finished sorting out. She set his plate down last. "The stew you've been making." "Calhoun says 2 months now. What's your method for the broth?" He blinked, having expected something else. "I render the bone first, then the vegetables, then water, and let it go most of the afternoon." "That's exactly right," she said. "The method's sound. The trouble is the cut of meat. You've been using the shank. I'll order chuck from the mercantile. It'll taste different." She moved back toward the stove. "You can show me your method Thursday if you want." Pete looked at his plate, then at Calhoun, who was carefully looking somewhere else. "Yes, ma'am," Pete said, and something in his shoulders dropped about an inch. Lily appeared in the kitchen door at 7:15, working her chair through the gap Amelia had widened the night before, 40 minutes with a borrowed saw, taking 2 inches off each side of the doorstop. The hands went briefly quiet. Lily looked the men over with the frank assessment of someone who saw no reason to pretend she wasn't looking. "Are you the cowboys?" "Some of us," Calhoun said. "Do you have horses?" "Several." Lily processed the moral weight of this. "Can I see them?" "When the work allows," Calhoun said, glancing at Amelia, who gave him nothing specific. "I expect we can arrange it." "Okay." Lily rolled to the end of the table and looked at the plate Amelia set in front of her. "There are only 4 biscuits. That's how many are left." "Pete ate 3, said a hand named Dobbs, and the table, cautiously, began to laugh. It was the first laughter that kitchen had held in a long while, and Amelia felt the shape of the room change around it. Pete went red, and then, seeing that the laugh was with him and not at him, let himself grin. Calhoun watched the whole thing over the rim of his coffee with the quiet attention of a man who had been running hands long enough to know that a cook who could make a table laugh on the first morning was worth more than one who could merely cook. She learned them over the following weeks the way she learned all of it, by paying attention. Gustafsson, the Swede, could not eat onions without suffering for it, so she cooked around him without ever making a point of it. Dobbs was 43 and had been on ranches since he was 16 and hid a soft heart behind a hard mouth. Pete wanted, more than anything in the world, to be taken seriously, and so she took him seriously, asked his opinion on the beef order, let him show her his stew method on Thursday, and corrected him only where correction actually helped. Calhoun she came to rely on, and he her, in the wordless way of two able people who recognize skill in each other and are grateful not to have to explain them. None of it was dramatic. It was biscuits and coffee, and knowing which man took his eggs hard and which one was homesick and needed the bigger plate unasked. It was the small daily work of making a house into a place people wanted to come in from the cold, too. She had done it before, in a narrow set of rooms in Cincinnati. She found she had missed it more than she had let herself know. Lily settled in beside her. The girl took her breakfast at the south window as the mornings turned cold, played endless games of cards against Dobbs, who lost with a bad grace that delighted her, and struck up a complicated friendship with a mule named Adelaide, who lived in the near paddock and accepted carrots through the fence rail with an air of doing Lily a personal favor. For a child who had spent 2 years being looked at, it was the first place in a long time where people simply let her be a person in the room. Amelia watched it happen and did not make any plain note of it, which was a thing she was doing more. The window seat took Wyatt 3 evenings. Amelia had not asked him to build it. She had told him one could be built, meaning she would build it herself when she found the time and the lumber, the way she had built all of it else her life had required. But 2 evenings later, she came out to the barn to return a tool and found him at the workbench with a lamp, planing a length of pine and a frame already joined and squared beside him. "That's not a housekeeping job," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's a carpentry job. I'm better at those." He did not look up from the plane. She said she wanted it under the south window. "So it wants to be the right height for the chair to pull alongside, and low enough she can move herself onto it without help." "That right?" Amelia stood in the barn doorway and looked at the man and the frame and the care he was taking with the height of a seat for a child he had known 5 days. And something in her chest did the opposite of the thing it had done on the landing. Where the stone had dropped, something now rose. "That's right," she said. He worked at it 3 evenings running, after the day's chores, in the barn with a lamp. Amelia found excuses to pass by, a tool to return, a question about the beef order, and watched him take the same care with the height of a child's window seat that another man might have taken with a thing he meant to sell. He sanded the edges round so there would be no splinters. He set the seat back a few inches from the glass so a draft off the window would not chill her. He tested the height against a chair he had borrowed from the kitchen, adjusting it twice, because a seat a wheelchair could not pull alongside was no use to anybody. "You could have let me build it," Amelia said on the second evening. "You've got a house to run." He did not look up from the plane. "And I've built a thing or two. My wife used to say I was better with wood than with people." Something crossed his face and passed. She wasn't wrong. It was the first thing he had offered her about himself without being asked, and Amelia knew it for what it was, and did not make anything of it, which was the surest way to make certain he would offer another. He set it under the window on the 3rd evening. Lily rolled up beside it, studied it the way she studied all of it, and then moved herself off the chair and onto the seat with the practiced ease of someone who found unwanted help more hindrance than aid. She turned to face the south window and the gold cottonwoods and the hard blue sky. She did not thank him effusively. Lily was not built for that. She looked out the window a while, and then she said, "You made it the right height." I measured the chair. Most people guess. Then it's wrong. I'm not much of a guesser. Lily nodded slowly, filing him permanently under a heading Amelia could not see but could guess at, and went back to the window. From that evening the south window was Lily's. It was where she took her breakfast when the mornings turned cold, where she laid out her cards against Dobbs, where she watched the light come down off the mountains, and the men ride out, and the cottonwoods turn from gold to bare. It was the first thing in 2 years that had been built to her measure, instead of expecting her to fit herself to it. And Amelia, who had spent those same 2 years lifting and adjusting and improvising a world that had never once been made for her daughter, felt the whole meaning of the place shift around that one plain bench of sanded pine. She filed that too, and said nothing. The trouble began, as Wyatt had warned her it might, in town. He told her the shape of it plainly enough. Nathan Whitmore had wanted the Double M's water rights for 6 years. The creek that came off the high pass ran through Wyatt's land first, and a man building toward the mining and timber interests moving into the low country needed water he could sell. Nathan had made offers. Wyatt had refused them. And a woman publicly attached to the Double M, hired off a freight landing the same afternoon Nathan had discarded her, gave the whole valley something to talk about, which Nathan could use. The talk came first, carried by a woman named Margaret Holloway, who ran the kind of quiet social campaign that never says a cruel thing directly, and never needs to. What kind of woman came off a freight and moved out to a bachelor's ranch the same day? What it said about Wyatt Mercer's judgment. Whether a child like that ought to be out there at all. Amelia had been the subject of talk for 2 years. She let it run off her. What she could not let run off was what came after the talk. The fences came first. 2 of the eastern lines cut clean, wire snipped at intervals, posts left intact, which meant it was deliberate. Then, 12 days later, while Wyatt was 2 days away at the county seat, someone got into the storage barn in the dark and poured coal oil through 2 sacks of winter feed, 40 bushels of oats and cornmeal ruined, in November, with the passes starting to close. Amelia heard the dogs at 2 in the morning, not the raccoon bark, but the sharp repeating alarm she had learned to tell apart in her first week. She was out of bed before she had finished deciding to be. She went to Lily's door first. Lily was already awake, sitting up in the dark. The dogs sound different. I know. Stay in your room. Lock the door from the inside. Mom. Lily. She used the voice that was not a discussion, and Lily, who knew the difference, pulled herself up and turned the lock. Amelia went out through the kitchen. Calhoun was already in the yard with a lantern, and 2 hands were running from the bunkhouse toward the storage barn, and the dogs were at the barn door still barking, but by the time anyone reached it, whoever had been there was gone. What they had done was pour coal oil through 2 sacks of winter feed, 40 bushels of oats and cornmeal ruined, in November, with the passes starting to close and the winter supply runs nearly finished. Calhoun stood in the barn with his lantern and looked at the oiled grain and said, very quietly, a word Amelia decided she had not heard. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough. Whoever did this knew exactly where the grain was and how to get in without forcing the main door. This wasn't random." "No," she said. "It wasn't." She did not sit with her hands folded, waiting for Wyatt to come home and tell her what had already happened. She sat down at the kitchen table with the ledger and the supply records and worked the numbers, because it was not her ranch. She was scrupulously clear about that. But she was the one here, and the numbers were her domain, and doing the work was better than waiting. By mid-morning, she had a partial answer. A neighbor named Hendricks, whose land bordered the Double M, had come off a good harvest with grain to spare. She knew because his wife had mentioned it in passing at the Mercantile 2 weeks earlier, managing her pride in the good year the way people do. Amelia sent Pete over with a note that proposed a plain purchase at market rate. Immediate payment from the household account, no mention of charity and no fuss. Hendrix's wife sent back a yes and 25 bushels before noon. When Wyatt got home that afternoon, having pushed his horse hard after a hand found him at the county seat, he came into the kitchen and looked at her face before he said anything. "How bad?" "We lost 40 bushels. Hendrix sold us 25 this morning. It's not a full replacement, but it carries the livestock to January, and by February the South Road opens for a supply run." She turned the ledger toward him. "I used the household account. It's all recorded. You can check it against Hendrix." "I'm not going to check it." "You should. It's your money." "I'm not going to check it," Wyatt said again, and there was something in his voice she had not heard before, held very carefully in place. He looked around the kitchen, at the ledger, at the evidence of a day managed in his absence. Then he sat down. He did not reach for coffee or do any of the things he usually did when he sat. He just sat. "You should eat," she said after a while. "You've had nothing since morning. I'm all right. You're not, and it doesn't help anyone for you to pretend it. Sit, I kept a plate warm." He looked up at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not annoyance, more a kind of surprised knowing. "You notice all of it. Most things." "He's going to keep coming," he said. "The fence was a message. The grain is a cost. The next thing will be worse. I know." She set the plate in front of him. "So stop spending yourself on the version of this where he decides it isn't worth it and walks away. He won't. A patient man doesn't walk away. He waits, and he pushes, and he waits again. Your job isn't to guess when he'll stop. It's to make sure this ranch is still standing when he finally overreaches. And he will overreach, because the thing he wants keeps not happening, and that is exactly the kind of thing that makes patient men impatient." Wyatt looked at her a long moment. That steady look he had, like a man checking whether what he was seeing today matched what he had seen yesterday. "You're direct," he said. "It saves time." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a real smile she had seen from him, and it lasted about 2 seconds before his face went back to what it usually was. Not grim, exactly. Private. Then he ate what she had put in front of him, slowly and without much talk, and she sat across the table with her own coffee, and did not fill the silence with noise. Outside, the night settled over the ranch in a cold quiet, and one of the dogs barked once at something in the dark, and then went still. The next thing was worse, and it was Lily who caught it. The sky to the northwest had been building something since midday. A yellow-gray color Calhoun had looked at twice that morning and said nothing specific about, which was itself a kind of message. The wind had come around from the west to the northwest, and it carried the dry, cold smell that was different from ordinary winter cold. At 2:15, Lily came through the kitchen door faster than Amelia had seen her move the chair in weeks, pushing hard enough that she nearly caught the frame on her left. "There's smoke." Amelia was up before the word was finished. "Where?" "Past the north fence, on the hill. I saw it from the window when the wind shifted." Lily's voice was controlled, but her hands were tight on the armrests. "It's not the right color for a campfire. And it's spreading." Amelia hit the porch and looked north and saw it at once, a line of smoke rising off the ridge above the north pasture, still distant but moving with the wind, which had picked up in the last 10 minutes and was pushing it southeast toward the dry autumn grass of the upper range. She turned and shouted for Calhoun, and her voice carried across the yard with a quality she had not known she had until the situation required it. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not orderly. Calhoun had the hands moving toward the north fence within 5 minutes, with shovels and water barrels loaded on the flat wagon, and sent Pete at a hard ride to the 2 nearest ranches to pull help. The fire was moving faster than it should have. The dry grass and the northwest wind were conspiring, and by the time the hands reached the ridgeline, it had crossed the upper fence and was burning down the north slope toward 15 head of cattle still grazing. Amelia stayed at the ranch house. No one told her to. Everyone was moving too fast for telling, but someone had to manage what a fire in the north pasture actually required, which was water and containers and a prepared place for animals and people to come back to. She worked the pump, filled every barrel and bucket and trough she could find, and directed Pete's second run back from the barn with the spare water tank on the flatbed. She sent Lily to the porch, where she could see the yard but go no further. Lily stayed on the porch for the first 20 minutes. Then she came back through the kitchen door, and Amelia, too busy to deal with it, snapped that she'd said to stay put. Lily's voice took on the flat override it got when she had information that mattered more than the argument. "The fire's going the wrong way." Amelia stopped. "What?" The wind changed. Everyone went to the north pasture, but the main line turned. "It's going east now," she pointed. "If it goes east, it hits the equipment barn first, and then the hay. The hay's where Mr. Hendricks's grain is." Amelia stood still for exactly 1 second, long enough to see it whole. The replacement grain, stored in the same barn as the winter hay. If the fire reached it, they would not need Nathan Whitmore to ruin the ranch. It would be done in an afternoon. Then she ran. She found Calhoun at the north brake line and did not slow down to be polite about it. She grabbed his arm and turned him. The wind shifted. The fire's turning east. The equipment barn. He looked at the smoke and read it the way a man reads country he has spent decades in, fast, without pause. And then he said one short, hard word and began shouting. The reorganizing of 20 men fighting a moving fire on new information is not a clean process. There was confusion and crossed signals, and 2 men who went the wrong way and had to be redirected, and the north line kept burning while the main group pivoted east. But the pivot happened because a 6-year-old had been watching the smoke from her window seat when the wind shifted, and had saw that what she saw did not match where everyone had gone, and had come inside to say so instead of waiting for an adult to notice. The equipment barn did not burn. The fire reached the east perimeter fence and stalled there, partly the break the men dug in 40 brutal minutes of work, partly the wind easing just before 5, dropping from a driving push to an inconsistent gust that gave the fire less to work with. The north pasture lost a strip of grass 200 yards long and 50 wide, which was a loss but not a catastrophe. The cattle were found milling by the west gate, uninjured, smelling of smoke, aggrieved. Wyatt came in from the north line at dusk, with his face and hands dark with ash and a burn on his left forearm that he was holding away from his side and pretending did not hurt. Amelia set a bucket of cool water and a clean cloth in front of him at the kitchen table silently, and he submerged the arm and let out a sound that was mostly not a sound. How bad? Manageable. The north grass is a write-off. The fencing wants work. Everything else held. The barn held. He looked up at her. "Calhoun said you spotted the wind shift." Lily spotted it. She was watching from her window. When everyone went north, she saw the line turn east. She came inside to tell me. Wyatt sat with that a long moment. Outside, the last of the men came back from the lines, their voices low and tired across the quiet yard. The smell of smoke had settled into everything, the curtains, the walls. "If the fire had reached the hay," he said slowly. "I know." He looked down at the water and his submerged arm, and then at the tabletop. "Where is she?" "I put her to bed an hour ago. She was exhausted." He nodded. He was quiet a moment. "She's going to need to hear she did well. I already told her." "Tell her again," he said quietly. "Some things need saying more than once." Amelia looked at him across the table, this man with ash on his face and a burned arm in a bucket, sitting in the kitchen she had cleaned in October, in the house she had put back together piece by piece, in the place she had arrived in with $4 and a wheelchair and nothing resembling a plan. She thought about what Nathan Whitmore had done, the fences, the grain, and now a fire on a dry hillside in a northwest wind, and knew with a cold clarity that this was not the end of it, that it would go on until it couldn't, and that the only question left was whether the ranch was strong enough to absorb it, and whether the people in it could hold together under the weight of a man who believed time and money were on his side. "Eat something," she said. "You can't think straight on an empty stomach." He did not argue. He ate what she put in front of him, and she sat across the table with her coffee. And outside the night settled over the ranch in a cold quiet that smelled of smoke and scorched grass, and under it the first faint mineral sharpness of a frost coming in off the mountains before morning. The fire was Nathan Whitmore's mistake, though it took the valley a while to say so out loud. The fences had happened in the dark on a property line. The grain had happened at 2 a.m. in a locked barn. But a fire on a ridge in November burned for 3 hours in the open afternoon and was visible from the main road, and 6 families from neighboring ranches came out to help fight it, and watched the Double M's hands work, and went home and talked about what they had seen, which was a ranch under pressure, doing its work with a skill that earned respect. They had also heard, through Calhoun and through Pete's less disciplined version, about the fences and the grain, and the pattern was not invisible to people who had lived in that valley long enough to know what it looked like when a man was pushing. Then Nathan went to the bank. He suggested to Elias Drummond, who held a small current loan of Wyatt's, that there might be irregularities worth examining, implied, without quite saying, that the Double M situation made the collateral shaky. Drummond told him the loan was current and there were no irregularities. Nathan pushed. Drummond, who found being used as a lever insulting in the specific way bankers do, pushed back, and then shared the whole talk with discreet outrage to 2 other men in Silver Creek, and by the end of the week it had reached half the valley. That was the turn. A town is a slow animal, and it had watched Amelia be shamed on a landing and said nothing, and watched a able woman run a hard ranch through a hard autumn and said little more. But a town also keeps a private ledger of who did what to whom, and it settles that ledger in its own time. The fences had happened in the dark. The grain had happened at 2 a.m. behind a locked door. But a man leaning on a banker to break a neighbor already under attack, that happened in daylight, in words, to a man who repeated them, and the valley did the arithmetic it had been putting off. Margaret Holloway's careful campaign found quite suddenly that it had no audience. Women who had cooled toward Amelia at the Mercantile warmed again in the slightly overcorrecting way of people who have realized they were on the wrong side of a thing and would like it not to have been noticed. Nathan had spent 6 years being careful. In one impatient week, he had let the whole town see exactly what he was. But he did not stop, and he did not send a lawyer, and he did not stay away. He came himself. It was a cold, bright morning near the end of the month, the ground white with the first hard frost, and Amelia was on the porch shaking out a rug with Lily at the window inside, when Nathan Whitmore rode into the Double M yard with 2 men behind him and a folded paper in his gloved hand. He had come, he announced, to make a final offer on the water rights, and to say plainly what everyone in the valley was too polite to say, that a ranch harboring a woman he had turned away and a crippled child had no business standing between honest men and the future of the country. He said the word crippled loud enough to carry to the window. Amelia set the rug down over the porch rail very slowly. Wyatt came out of the barn. He did not hurry, which was somehow worse than hurrying. Calhoun came from the corral, and Pete from the woodlot with an axe still in his hand, and Dobbs and Gustafson from wherever they had been, and they spread out across the frozen yard silently between them, and Nathan Whitmore, who had spent 6 years keeping his business to offers and lawyers and paper, and had never once been made to say it to Wyatt Mercer's face in front of witnesses, began, visibly, to grasp the shape of the thing he had ridden into. "You cut my fences," Wyatt said. He did not raise his voice. He came down off nothing. He had simply appeared in the center of the yard the way weather appears. "You poured coal oil through 40 bushels of my winter feed in the dark. And there's a burn scar on my north ridge that didn't come off any lightning. On a dry afternoon, on land nobody crosses without leave." "You've no proof of any of that," Nathan said. But his eyes had gone to the men ranged across the yard, and to the road behind him, and something in the set of his certainty had come loose at one corner. "I've got a fire on the record with the sheriff. I've got a county examiner rewalking the old survey. I've got 6 neighbor families who came out to fight a blaze on my ridge and went home asking each other how it started." Wyatt took one step closer, and then another, unhurried. "But that's not why you're going to turn that horse around, Whitmore. You're going to turn it around because you rode into my yard to make me small in front of the people who work for me. And instead, you've made yourself small in front of them, and every man standing here is going to carry the story of this morning into Silver Creek by supper. You've spent 6 years being careful. You threw it away in a month because you couldn't stand that a thing you wanted kept not happening." Nathan's face had gone tight and pale in the cold. "And you said a word, just now, loud, so a child at that window could hear it." Wyatt stopped an arm's length from the man's horse and looked up at him, and his voice did not rise, but something underneath it did. "Say it again. I'd like every man in this yard to hear you say it a second time, so there's no argument later about the kind of man who rode out here this morning to say it." Nathan Whitmore did not say it again. He sat his horse a moment longer, with the paper going soft in his fist, looking at a yard full of men who had decided, without a word being exchanged among them, exactly where they stood. And then he turned the horse around, the way small men do when a room they expected to command turns out to be full of people who see them clearly, and he rode out of the Double M yard with his 2 men trailing behind him, and nobody said anything until the sound of them was gone off the frozen road. At the window, Lily had watched the whole of it. When Amelia came inside, her daughter was still looking out at the empty yard where the frost was beginning to melt off in the strengthening sun. "He didn't look big this time," Lily said. "No," Amelia said. "He didn't. Last time, on the landing, he looked big, like he could decide things about us." Lily turned from the window. "This time, he just looked like a man on a horse who wanted to leave." "That's exactly what he was," Amelia said. "That's what he was the first time, too. We just couldn't see it yet." The legal end of it came in a letter weeks later, read at the kitchen table. A county examiner brought from outside the valley confirming the Double M's water rights as filed. The old survey discrepancy ruled within the margin of its era. No misrepresentation. Nathan did not come to deliver it. His mechanisms had run out, and the valley ranchers were coordinated now in a way they had not been, and anything he did from here only added to the record. Wyatt set the letter down, and what crossed his face was not triumph. It was the quieter thing of a man setting down a weight he had carried so long he had half forgotten what standing without it felt like. "It's over," Amelia said. "The legal part's over. He'll keep wanting the land. But his ways of taking it are gone." She turned back to the stove, where a pot roast had been filling the house all day with a smell Lily had been asking about since noon. "Amelia," Wyatt said. She turned. He was still at the table, and he was looking at her the way he did when he had been deciding how to say a thing for longer than the moment. "You came here to work, to save money, to leave. Yes, you stayed through the worst of it. You managed things I never asked you to manage, and did them better than I would have." He stopped and started again, and she knew that this was costing him the way the first thing he had ever told her about his wife had cost him. "This house was dead before you came. I don't mean untidy. I mean dead. I'd been living in it like a man camps in a place he's passing through. Because after my wife I couldn't stand for it to be a home again. And you walked in off a freight landing with $4 and a daughter and made it a home in 3 months without asking my leave to do it, and I've been standing in the middle of that for weeks, not knowing how to say what it's meant." He looked at her steadily. "So I'll just say the plain thing. Stay. Not as the housekeeper. Stay." Amelia looked at him, and at the kitchen around them, the stove she had learned the moods of, the shelves she had ordered, the frost on the low glass where the cold came through, the sound of Lily's chair somewhere down the hall, and the murmur of the girl explaining something at length to a mule who was not present. "I came here thinking it was temporary," she said, "because I was afraid that thinking of it as permanent meant I had something left to lose. It's easier to keep moving. You can't lose a place you never let yourself belong to." She paused. "But Lily calls this home now. She started in November. Just in passing, at home Dobbs does this, at home Adelaide does that. She doesn't make anything of it. She says it the way she says true things, without decoration, because to her it simply is one." She looked at the pot on the stove and back at him. "A child who has been made to feel like a burden in a great many rooms does not call a place home unless it has actually become one. That matters to me more than anything else you could offer, and more than anything I could tell you about myself." Then yes," she said. They were married in April, when the north pasture had come back green the way she'd told him it would. Not a large crowd. The valley ranchers and their families, Drummond from the bank, and every hand from the Double M, including Pete, who cried and denied it afterward and convinced nobody. Calhoun stood beside Wyatt. Lily stood beside her mother in a dress she had chosen herself and considered with deep seriousness for 2 weeks, and which she wore with the composure of someone who had decided the occasion warranted it and was not going to make a fuss beyond that. The valley came, and that was its own kind of statement. 6 months earlier, some of these same families had watched a man call off a wedding on a freight landing and had said nothing. A few had laughed. Now they came out to the Double M in their good clothes and stood in the April sun and made a point, without ever saying it directly, of being on the right side of a thing they had not defended when it happened. Margaret Holloway did not come, which surprised no one and disappointed fewer. At the reception, Lily held court near the paddock fence, receiving people's congratulations with a measured graciousness that made her look about 40 years old, and correcting, with factual precision, anyone who tried to make her the hero of the fire. "You saved the hay barn," Dobbs told her. "The men saved the hay barn. I told my mother which way the fire was going. Same thing. It's not the same thing." Lily had the patience of someone who had explained the distinction before and found it worth explaining again. "It's different, and it matters that it's different. I did my part. They did theirs. The barn got saved because everybody did the part they could do." Dobbs looked at her a while. "Kid," he said, "you are going to be something." "I'm already something," Lily said. Amelia was standing by the cottonwoods when Wyatt found her, the trees leafed out now, that spring green that made the whole east side of the property look different from how she had first seen it in the gold of late September. She had watched the place move through autumn into winter, into spring, which meant she had already seen more of it in one turning year than most people ever really see of the places they live their whole lives. They looked at the ranch together, the fixed porch boards, the uncracked windows. The path to the barn Calhoun had graded properly, so Lily did not need a running start. The equipment barn that had not burned. The new fence posts along the north pasture where the grass was coming back green and unmarked. Any regrets? he asked, the way he asked things he truly wanted the answer to. She thought about Cincinnati and the factory and the $4 and the freight and the landing, and the moment Nathan Whitmore had looked at her daughter's chair and said what he said, and everything that had come after. Not a single one, she said. Through the window of the house behind them, if you had looked, you would have seen the south window seat a man had built to a child's exact measure in 3 evenings. The first thing in 2 years that had been made to fit Lily instead of asking Lily to fit it. Lily was not in it just then. She was out by the fence in the April light, holding court, being something, but it was there, under the south window, waiting for her the way a home waits, not a place you are given and not a place you arrive at cleanly, but a thing built from the materials you have, which are never the ones you plan to use, by people who decided to stay. Most people didn't stay. She and Wyatt had. Not because it was easy, because they had each decided and then decided together that the cost of it was worth paying. That was all it had ever been. Not destiny, and not a smoothly arranged ending handed down to deserving people. Just 2 of them deciding, and a child who had learned to read every face in every room finally sitting in one where she did not have to, and the weight of all those small daily choices building over 1 turning year into something that looked from the outside like a life, because that is exactly what it was. Across the yard, Lily looked up from the fence, found her mother among the cottonwoods, and raised one hand in a small wave that meant nothing specific and everything general. I see you. I'm here. We're fine. Amelia raised her hand back. And that was enough. And the day kept going. And the grass in the north pasture was green all the way to the ridge.